Hi, hello and welcome everybody. I'm Dan Prince and welcome to our first ever session of Beyond Cybersecurity for CyberWorks at Lancaster University. Beyond Cybersecurity is about exploring the positive side of the intersection between business and cybersecurity. Like everyone, we're in lockdown, so we brought together my esteemed guests virtually through the power of video conferencing. Thankfully, the mass adoption of video conferencing during the pandemic has been safe and secure for most. This is in part due to the security technologies that many of us take for granted or expect to be there. Like an invisible hand, they shape many of the aspects of our technological lives and society at large. It's important to say that video conferencing was at the heart of sci-fi when I was growing up. So it's fitting that our theme for today and for beyond cybersecurity in general is the future of business through the lens of cybersecurity. The format of Beyond Cybersecurity is to have one of our guests provide a provocative talk followed by a panel session. Everyone watching can participate in a conversation through the chat function, and your questions will come through to us, and we'll try and get through as many as we possibly can. But first, I'm delighted to introduce our first set of guests on Beyond Cybersecurity, Brian Higgins, Sarah Clark, and Tom Cheesewright. Brian is a director at Arco Cybersecurity, and it's fair to say Brian's experience is wide and varied. Starting out at the roulette tables of London and going via cruise ships, he arrived at cybersecurity through law enforcement and the magistrate's bench. Brian is a staunch diversity advocate in our cybersecurity community. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Dan, for those few kind words.
Sarah Clark is on a mission to cut through security and privacy murk and reduce the staff extermination qualities of doing these things in a more secure and privacy respected way. Sarah specializes in data protection and cybersecurity governance, risk and compliance, which is something that I am very interested in as well. Sarah is convinced that her time spent working in pubs, on help desks, and fielding frequent flyer complaints has helped her make sense of things as much as her time spent on the server room floor. Welcome, Sarah. As I said at the start, today we are focusing on the future. So who better to help us explore this than Tom Cheesewright? Tom is the applied futurist, helping companies like Facebook and Google, Audi and BMW get a handle on the future. And he's the author of Future Proof Your Business, a recommended read from the Financial Times this summer. But like me, he's also a nerd, as you can tell from the things behind me. He's in the middle of building his own electric car with many mishaps along the way, and COVID permitting, a keen roller skater. Welcome, Tom.
Thanks, Dan.
Tom is also going to be our first provocative speaker who's going to talk about why leading companies and prioritizing agility over efficiency, why Lego bricks beat die-cast cars in tomorrow's business world, and how the changing shape of business creates cybersecurity. So without any further ado, over to you, Tom.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dan. Right, give me a second while I just throw up some slides. There we go. So yeah, as Dan said, I'm an applied futurist, and that is entirely made up job title, but somehow people want it. And I spend my time working with organizations around the world, bits of government, big corporations, and small organizations through industry bodies like the IOD, to really try and answer three questions. First of all, what does our future look like? How do we scan the horizon to see what's coming? Secondly, how do we tell that story? And I get involved with companies trying to tell the story of the future to their staff about how it will affect them, to their shareholders and their customers. And then the third question I get involved in asking is, what on earth do we do about it? We've seen this vision of the future. We've convinced people we've got to make change. Now, what do we do? What's next? I'm going to try and talk you through a little bit of all three of those today, based on a sort of formula, a model I've come up with, working with all of these organizations, learning from their experience and seeing what's affecting them today. I'm going to put that through, as Dan says, the lens of cybersecurity, because some of the changes we're seeing in the shape of organizations, particularly at the moment, really have a direct impact on the efforts they have to make, the questions they have to tackle, and actually the benefits they can get from good cybersecurity practice as well. But I really want to start with something quite significant in terms of almost a philosophical shift, if you like, in the nature of business. And if you look at the last 100 years, if you look at the things we're taught in management schools, if you look at the practices we pick up as we spend our time in business, so much of our philosophy of business still is very much about optimization. It's about efficiency. It's about that sort of Joe Wicks thing of how can we be more lean, something lots of us spent certainly lockdown one trying to be following his early morning PE sessions. And what that means is that organizations tend to be fixated on what they do and try and do it better and better and better, doing it the next year, the next day, the next week, with perhaps fewer people, less investment, less resource than they did before, with the aim of driving greater growth, greater profit. And that's been very successful for a lot of organizations. It's been the way that many of my clients have got to the scale that they have, just this sort of continuous polishing improvement of their practices, their processes to get better and better and more efficient. The problem with that is when you do that, you tend to get locked in a particular way of doing things. You tend to sort of polish this rut, as I describe it. And that's fine when the things people want from you tomorrow are the same as things people wanted from you yesterday. It's really, really problematic when actually the things customers want from you, the thing the market demands, is changing all the time. And we operate today in what I describe as this age of high frequency change. And what I mean by that is not that everything's changing faster. I'd be an absolute hypocrite if I said that was true, because I'm sat in a 140-year-old house doing this call. Clearly, lots of things stay the same. Most of us woke up in a bed this morning that's been around for a few thousand years. You probably went to the bathroom, used a toilet that was 400 years old, not your actual bathroom, but the invention itself. And so lots of things actually change very, very slowly. But what's happening right now, due to our globalized age, these very, very short, low friction connections between us and other markets around the world, despite the impacts of protectionism between the US and China, despite the impacts of Brexit, is that innovations, ideas, products, services, media flow around the world now faster than they ever have before. And one by one, they're disrupting markets. New ideas, new paradigms, new inventions are coming through and turning markets on their head. And we never know which one's going to be next. We never know when it's going to be happen. All we can be certain of is that this wave of high frequency change is going to blow through at some point and turn things upside down. And in that environment, when things are being turned over so quickly, when we're facing this consistent disruption, actually just focusing on being better and better and better at what you do is a really big weakness, when actually you've got to be focusing on what should we be doing next. And this is why so many of my clients are spending a lot of time and investment, one way or another now, in changing their focus from the leadership down, from being focused on optimization, how do we be as efficient as we can be, how do we polish what we do, to being agile. How do we see things first? How do we adapt to the new environment? How do we change our proposition to meet what the client or the market needs now? And this is a really big philosophical shift. It drives all sorts of changes. And it drives all sorts of questions now, like, how do we do it? Even if you accept that premise that it's more important to be agile now, how do we change our behaviors, our culture, our structures to try and be more agile? And so the last few years working with clients, what I've done is built this idea that I call the athletic enterprise. How do you take the characteristics of the most successful athletes who are agile and bring them into the enterprise? And there's really three components to this. The first one is about enhancing your senses. So just like an athlete, you can read the game ahead of other people and see what's coming. How do you accelerate your decision making, your reaction, so that once you've seen what's coming, you can take the appropriate action? And how do you actually train the body? How do you get in shape for the game as it is today, not the game as it used to be? Because any sports aficionado will tell you that the game changes year on year. So let's start with those enhanced senses. How do you see the future first? How do you improve your foresight? And this is something that so many organizations struggle with. I can give you all sorts of examples of how bad organizations are at looking to the future, but one always stands out for me. And it comes from a piece of research I did with a software company called Profix in Canada. And we looked at medium-sized corporations typically. So some of you, no doubt, will fit into that category. And we asked their chief finance officers or their finance directors about the alignment between their annual strategy and their annual budget. And what absolutely horrified me was to find out that over 2/3 said that either their annual budget and annual strategy were not aligned at all, or if they were only aligned at the highest level. So what you've got is the chief exec saying, right, this is the direction we're going to take, and setting this bold direction and writing this strategy, and the chief finance officer in almost a completely separate process saying, well, this is what last year's budget said. I'm going to copy and paste, tweak a few bits to fit what we can afford this year. And so often these big plans, these big bold plans, are just unsupported by investment. Now, that's the one foresight process that we have to do every year, that every organization does. And in 2/3 of cases, we know it's not done well, which tells me that all the rest of the foresight planning processes we do probably aren't that well done either. So one of the things I talk to all my clients about is actually say, look, you've got to devote more time to thinking about the future. And I know you're busy. I know your head's down. I know you're constantly firefighting, and just keeping the business ticking over is a constant challenge. But you've got to find a way to step back. You've got to carve out some time. And I'll talk about that in a second. You've got to devote at least 1% of your time to thinking about the future in a structured fashion. And I preach this very simple way for doing that, which is get out of the business for 1 day every 6 months, which is roughly 1% of your time, and do two things. Firstly, ask people about what causes them pain and pressure. Ask your customers, ask your partners, ask your staff at every layer of the organization about what frustrates them, what stops them being as productive as they could be, what winds them up about your service or your product. And then go and look at the big trends coming in. Go and look at what's happening to your peers or businesses in adjacent industries. Go and pick up a copy of Wired magazine, or just read the daily newspapers, the business pages, and see what big trends are coming through. And then what you look for is where those big trends clash with those pressures and frustrations that you're already facing. And where one hits the other is probably where you're going to see the biggest change in the shortest amount of time on the nearest horizon. And you scale those things based on how big you think the impact's going to be. You give it a number, an estimated number. You pick the top 5, you deal with them over the next 6 months, and then you repeat the process ad infinitum, constantly carving out more time, if you can, to spend more time thinking about the future. So once you've done that, once you've built that into your business processes, 1 day every 6 months focused on the future, you've got to work out how to get better at reacting to the things you see. And again, this is something a lot of my clients struggle with. How do we take decisions quickly? So much, sort of sclerotic bureaucracy slowing things down. How do we fix that? And typically people take one of two approaches. They either try and accelerate the flow of information through the business, or improve the quality of information to the people taking decisions at the heart of the business. And there's lots of different ways you can do that. You can invest in big data, data lakes, business analytics software. And this stuff's really good, right? As long as you know how to use it, you can use it to answer business questions. It's incredibly powerful. But there is a much better way to accelerate decision making, and that is to delegate. That's to push power to the edges of the organization, so the people close to the customers, close to the partners, close to the suppliers can take decisions for themselves based on the information that they see without having to refer it up. And one of my favorite stories about an organization who does this brilliantly is about Lidl. It is Lidl. I'm in a quarter German household, and about 5 years ago, they just rolled out One Direction Easter eggs onto the center aisles, those crazy center aisles where you might just as likely to find a welding helmet as a pair of riding joggers. And they'd rolled out these One Direction Easter eggs, and at the time, Lidl wasn't known for carrying sort of big brand items. And just after they'd pushed them out, disaster struck. And forgive me if this is triggering for anybody still, but Zayn left One Direction. And so this news comes in through the social media manager at Lidl, who then turns to the merchandising manager, and he's having a little cry. And he says to her, look, got some bad news. Zayn's left One Direction. What are we going to do about those Easter eggs? And she thinks about it for a second and says, well, 1/5 of the band's gone. Let's knock 1/5 of the price off. And so he takes this and says, great, I can run with this. He pushes out this tweet, and it captures the hearts of One Direction fans up and down the country who flood into Lidl and buy up these One Direction Easter eggs, and hopefully a riding crop and some joggers and everything else as well. Maybe even some groceries. And what's amazing about this story is that whole process, that whole big economic decision to discount a major line of goods was taken by two people in their early 20s. And the whole process from information coming in via social media to tweet coming out took a grand total of 20 minutes. They were incredibly responsive, incredibly reactive, picked up the zeitgeist, the mood of the day, and did their brand no harm at all. And I actually bumped into one of the non-exec directors of another supermarket a couple of years later and told this story. And I asked her, I said, could you have done this? And she said, even now, it would take us 3 days. 3 days to make a decision that big. And it just goes to show if you can push power to the edges, you can really accelerate decisions. But that does mean putting a lot more autonomy and responsibility in the hands of people at the edge. And as I will come back to, that presents a challenge. But the biggest thing you have to do, and the most challenging thing you have to do for your culture, for the shape of your organization to get in shape for this age of high frequency change, is actually fundamentally change the shape and structure of the organization from what I would call a monolith to a network. And the best way I can explain this is with an analogy. So rewind to the 1980s, and you've got a child who's really into cars, and particularly the sort of Audi Quattro, and perhaps they're a sort of prototype gene from ashes to ashes, fire up the Quattro, and they're into this Audi Quattro, this multiple rally winning Quattro, and they want one for Christmas. It's Christmas coming up. They're thinking about what's going to fill their stocking, and they write to Santa and say, I would really like a toy Audi Quattro. So another spoiler, sorry, Santa doesn't exist. It's parents who do it. You're going out to buy this stuff to fill the stocking, and you get to the toy shop, you get to the entertainer or whatever, and you've got two choices. You can buy the die-cast Audi Quattro, or you can buy the Lego one. Now, I know which one Dan would choose, but here's your options. You can pick one that's perfectly optimized. It looks just like the real thing. It's just like the thing they've seen on the telly. Or you can buy the Lego one. Now, the Lego one isn't perfectly optimized. It doesn't look just like the real thing. For a start, it's got these knobbly bobbly bits all over it. But crucially, what's going to happen 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week after Christmas Day, when your child gets bored of scudding the toy Quattro across the kitchen floor and getting under your feet? If they've got the die-cast one, they can't really change it into anything else, unless, like me as a child, they're into an angle grinders and super glue and they're going to rip it apart and reassemble it. But if you buy them the Lego one, they can disassemble it and build it into something completely different, a dragon or a dinosaur. It's not optimal, but it is adaptable. And this is the way people are building organizations now, not as perfectly deeply integrated die-cast models, but as networks of reusable components. Because what's incredible about Lego is not only can you reuse it to make other things, but when your friends come round, they can reuse these components as well. So let me give you some examples of this. I was doing some research for a client recently about the motor industry and looking at General Motors, and this is a great illustration as to how much the structure of these organizations has changed. Rewind about 25 years, General Motors was making roughly the same amount of money, not accounting for inflation, that it is now. It was employing, though, 3 times as many people to make the same number of cars. Now, how has this change been achieved? Partly it's about automation, it's about efficiency and robots, but a lot of this is that General Motors isn't this monolith anymore. It's increasingly a network of suppliers who all come together to produce these cars, bringing these components together from suppliers around the world. Now, Amazon is the absolute master of this, not always a popular company, particularly when they don't pay their taxes. But Amazon is the absolute master of understanding this network shape of business. Because rewind 15, 20, 16 years now, Jeff Bezos sent around a memo at Amazon to everybody and said, stop talking to each other. Basically, I don't want to be another monolith. Take all the functions in our organization, wrap them in the software equivalent of the knobbly bobbly bits on a Lego brick, and turn us into a box of Lego bricks that I can play with. A box of Lego bricks that not only can I stack up to make new businesses like Amazon Wine and easily dismantle again when it doesn't work, but bricks that other people around the world can use to power their businesses. And one of those bricks they created effectively with that memo was Amazon Web Services, one of the largest cloud hosting companies in the world, effectively formerly part of Amazon's IT function. And the whole of Amazon is built like this: digital Lego bricks that interact with each other to come together to fulfill a common goal, but also that can be disassembled, reassembled into something new, or used by other people as part of their business processes. Now, the challenge with this is when you break something up into these components, when you break apart the monolith, what you do is you create a lot more interfaces. You push a lot more people towards the edges of the organization. You imbue them with more decision making capability, more autonomy, and more responsibility. But fundamentally, you create a lot more interfaces between people. And interfaces are always going to be a challenge from a cybersecurity perspective. You've got your human to human interface, potential for social engineering and phishing if people are still conducting business over the phone, email, fax. Still, incredibly, in 2020, I still get asked to return contracts via fax. You've got your human to machine interfaces where your people are speaking to machines, whether that's through software as a service, whether that's interactive voice recorders or chatbots. Again, lots of opportunities for issues here. You've got your machine to human, where the machine sits on your end and is communicating with your customers, whether that's your own chatbot, an AI call agent running your call center, or automated emails. And you've got increasingly machine to machine interfaces, where two pieces of software or hardware are speaking to each other to monitor your shop floor, to see what's going on in your vehicle fleet, whatever it may be. And at every one of these interfaces, there's obviously challenges. But there's also an opportunity here, because as you go through this transformation, and the whole world is going through this transformation, yes, there are more interfaces. Yes, there is more focus on this interface, but increasingly that interface becomes a critical differentiator in business. How low friction you can make it to interact with you, how secure you can make that interaction with you, how much people feel they can trust that interaction with you, either human to human or digital, becomes an enormous part of your differentiation in this global marketplace. And you don't have to spend long on social media. We've had another situation this week where a research company's been shown that its interfaces are deeply insecure and encouraging very risky practice, to recognize just how important that trust element, that capability element is to partner organizations, is to customer organizations now as a differentiator in business. And so, what I'm encouraging people to do when I go and work with these clients around the world who are starting on this transition or undertaking this transition, I'm saying, look at those interfaces. Look at the interfaces in your organization. Look at how you speak to customers. Look at how you speak to partners. Look at how, when you break the organization into these functional Lego bricks, you build those interfaces. And when you do, think about just what a differentiator it is if you can keep the friction in that interface very, very low, but the trust in that interface very, very high, because it is an enormous differentiator for people. And as we start to take advantage of this global network of business components, the higher the trust you can build in that interface and the lower the friction, the greater your opportunities to compete with other people. And when you sit that alongside these other capabilities for improving your foresight, for scanning the horizon, and actually incorporating scanning for cyber risks in that foresight process, when you accelerate that decision-making capability, particularly by increasing the autonomy of the people now at the edges of your organization and giving them the right cyber skills, you are building an incredible platform for strength and differentiation in this very frequently disrupted marketplace. So that, for the large part, is my provocation. I'm encouraging everybody to try to future-proof their organizations, and to do so by accepting that at some point through these waves of high frequency change, disruption is going to come, and to prepare for it. To do that by looking at the shape of their organization, by not thinking as a monolith, but thinking as a network and preparing accordingly, by improving their sensing capabilities, by carving out time as leaders to look at the future with an open mind, to scan for both those risks in the cyber sense, but also those opportunities that it presents, and to accelerate their decision making by delegating power and giving responsibility and autonomy to people at the edge. But if you're going to do that, you have to address the risks in the process, the risks created by more interfaces, the risks created by more delegated and distributed power. But if you address those risks, if you tackle those things, you undoubtedly create new differentiation. You create new opportunities for secure and automatic and low friction partnerships and customers around the world. And if you enjoyed that, forgive me, I have to put the plug in because my publisher pops up on the Zoom call and verbally abuses me if not. And there's 2 books out there now: Future Proof Your Business, which, as Dan very kindly said, was recommended by the Financial Times this summer, and High Frequency Change, which will soon be out as an audio book as well. And I put a little landing page up for you all with this slide deck and some other materials if you're interested at tomcheesewright.com/cyber. Thank you very much. Back to you, Dan.
Thanks, Tom. That's really interesting. A lot of the points that you've brought up there, very much at the heart of our security digitalization program, which we run in GM, Greater Manchester, and also in Lancashire, and for companies that come and work with us at the university. This idea that actually cybersecurity can be a real fundamental game changer for them. And one of the things, we've known each other for a while, and one of the things I was really passionate about getting into that security digitalization program was the tool sets, particularly for SMEs, to start to think about the future as you've described. But first, just want to remind everybody that if you've got questions, keep them coming in the chat. There's a couple coming up that I see that John's posting through to us. But first, I wanted to just turn to Sarah and Brian and get their thoughts on what Tom was saying. So Sarah, coming to you first, what were your kind of top 2 or 3 takeaways from what Tom put forward?
Well, that there's so many parallels to my world of governance, risk and compliance for both privacy and cybersecurity. We try to wedge those 2 disciplines into financial risk management molds, and they largely don't fit, and we're only just now beginning to actually accept that, because there's enough credibility at the levels of management in those disciplines now to bring that to the attention of the board. I did write down athletic ethics, which I don't think is necessarily going to take off unless I try really hard. I could probably spin up a comedy routine based on it, but doing the kind of risk assessment is necessary to make sure that you're not missing gotchas down the line that you can't fix through beta release and then support. It actually takes quite a sophisticated expert deep dive. What you need to do is exactly as you're talking about, Tom, you need to pull out the core elements of that so people can do a sniff test. They can pull out those things that are going to be gotchas that you cannot retrofix. You largely cannot retrofix a fit. And then you need to equip your security people to be agile with a small a as well as a large one, depending on which direction you come at change assurance from. And you need to create some multi-purpose resources. I mean, it rang all kinds of bells for me. And when you're talking about interfaces, I've always talked about interfaces internally as well as externally. I've invited customer experience people in to say, help me improve my relationship with my stakeholders for change and vendor management within the business. Show me the customer journeys, because I need to show them how this impacts on how their worlds work. So that very much rang a bell. The trust thing is massive. The trust thing is absolutely giant size. And I think probably what I'm seeing from a privacy point of view, just looking outside in a little bit, is that while we're trying to enable more and more standardization and more machine involvement in that customer services, customer relations journey, we're perhaps not focusing on this sustaining the trust and the quality of those interactions, because you're going to have a lot more non-standard interactions falling through gaps with the amount you're having to standardize at the moment for the maturity of those technologies that you're implementing. And I think people are maybe missing a trick there. But in terms of opportunity, smaller businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, have all this at their fingertips that they can do with relatively little pain. My knowledge comes from working with giant-sized, regulated, largely financial services industries. The opportunities are boundless to take advantage of some of the things you're talking about when you're smaller and more medium. And that's what I took away.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we're finding with the companies we work with. There's actually that smallness and agility there can be really interesting to explore, and help companies to unpack the power, particularly small power companies, the power they have over larger companies. I think is really interesting. Brian, what were your thoughts?
The one thing that really struck me throughout the whole presentation was that the agility issue, large or small a, is fundamentally affected by inclusion and diversity. So the kinds of people that this model is asking to be more agile are the least agile people going. They're all like me, male, pale and stale, running businesses. They see the future as a replica of the past, and they want to do the similar things to produce similar results and keep making money. And borne out by the Lidl story, got the pronunciation there, Tom. The two people that were responsible for that fantastic piece of business were both in their 20s. Now, I'm not saying just age, diversity of age is going to help your business, but the fact remains, if businesses of any size and any ilk don't recognize the fact that the future is about inclusion and diversity, the workforce of today and the workforce of yesterday aren't going to be able to manage the work of tomorrow if they aren't joined by more diverse individuals who are going to be able to help them get to where they need to be. Mm-hmm. So I'm particularly not very agile myself, and so I sympathize with a lot of people in business, in enterprise, who would listen to that talk and think, well, yeah, it's great for what's his name, Jeff Bezos, because he's massive and he owns the company, but what about the rest of the frustrated people who are desperately trying to implement some kind of agility into a business that just at the moment isn't built for it? Mm-hmm. And the solution is inclusion and diversity of your workforce, so that you can collaborate. So I'm not saying sack everyone that's male, pale and stale like me and get new people in, because you need experience as well. But not many people have figured out yet that a good mix of people of any diverse community or background in your workforce will help you do all the things that Tom's just described that will make your business future-proof.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking about diversity at the Cyber House Party, which is a kind of an effort that's sprung up over the kind of COVID to bring cybersecurity practitioners and the community together, and they get some amazing DJs. So just a plug for the Cyber House Party if you haven't already seen that. But Tom, what are your thoughts, kind of just on what Sarah and Brian have to say?
I'll take those in reverse. I completely agree with Brian, and there's actually a big chunk in the book about bringing diverse perspectives together, because even if you don't have them in your business, you probably have them around your business. Long term, you should be looking at your hiring practices, and a lot of the companies I work with, one of the first questions I ask is, what's the average tenure of someone in this business? And you find out that on average someone's been there 17 years. And you're like, okay, there's not a lot of original thought in this organization. We can't turn that around overnight by hiring, but we can go and find all the partner organizations and find out if they've got a bit more diversity. Go and talk to your law firm. Go and talk to your accountants. Go and talk to your marketing agency. Go and talk to your customers and find people who don't look like you to come in and talk to you about what's next, and get them involved in your sort of foresight sessions. It's incredibly powerful. I thought Sarah's thing was really interesting. That's the sort of the parallels or lack thereof between the sort of financial risk models that we're used to implementing versus the right sort of risk models when you're looking at governance or data protection. And it's a new skill set. It's a skill set that a lot of organizations don't necessarily have in-house. And one of the big advantages of this very networked way of working is that those skill sets are on tap. They're available, they're out there, because people who've got that capability, they quite often don't want to sit in one organization. They've got skills that are applicable to a lot of organizations, and they put themselves out there as professionals. So one of the first things you can do is sort of dipping your toe in this water of living and operating in a more networked world, is to get used to bringing in skills to solve problems on a case-by-case basis and building teams to solve particular issues, rather than always looking inside the walls of the organization, which, as Brian said, might always show up all the same faces.
Yeah, I mean, that's some really interesting points. I was talking to a recruiter recently, and she was saying that she's seen a big trend towards kind of more freelance jobs, particularly recently with the pandemic. People can't travel, but also the freedom of being able to pick and choose what they want to do, and working really intensively for like 3 months and then having 3 months work off. There's a real kind of shift. That whole. I was definitely brought up with that whole 9-to-5 work ethic. That's your job. That is what a job looks like. But I really wonder what the types of jobs that my kids are going to have, and the way that they're going to be structured. and the issues that, you know, the recruiter was saying, you know, really having like these agile teams that bring to solve a particular problem and then just disband for an organization, leaving behind whatever it is they've developed, I think is a really interesting way, and that really picks up on a couple of the points that everybody's made, and that making sure in that having that diversity in there is really important as well. It kind of leads us nicely on to one of our first questions. So will freelance jobs see an immense increase as companies look to find competencies in an agile way? My view, and certainly, you know, when I speak to some of the students who are actually in on our MSc in our pen testing course right now, so fingers crossed everything stays up and running. They're thinking very differently about, you know, the corporate, you know, 25 years gold watch exit kind of approach. But what are people's views, and particularly, you know, really thinking around the issues associated with you know, cybersecurity trust of this agile working. For me, one of the things is, you know, just, you know, if I've got five or six different clients, you know, I'm a data scientist perhaps working on these really cutting edge algorithms, you know, there's a lot of IP there, and how do, you know, just simply how do I manage that as an independent contractor is one of the things that sort of springs into my mind. But Brian, just starting with you, what are your thoughts about the changes in the way that people are working and the agile workforce going forward?
I think the answer to the question is yes, there will be a move towards freelance because everyone's going to want to be agile because it is the future. However, and it's not like me, unfortunately, to be a buzzkill, but I'm massively concerned, and hopefully you'll go to Sarah next and she can comment on something like this, because what about how are we going to measure agility? Microsoft, for example, have just released a new product that's come in, slink it under the wire, like a late PMQ or something that no one's there to answer. But it's called the new Microsoft Productivity Score, and it's for employers, and it basically lets your employer monitor you remotely. So if you're working from home, it will do all this stuff. I think it was born out of COVID, but it can tell your employer how many Zoom calls you do, how long your camera's active for, what's your email return rate, how often are you clicking, everything. It monitors absolutely everything to a really, really micro level, and then reports back to your boss. So I'm wondering, and very worried about, if we're all going to be agile and working from home and doing little bits of here and little bits of there, how are the people paying our wages going to be monitoring our agility, and what's the downside to our workplace privacy when products like this productivity score are going to be imposed upon us so they can make sure we're doing what they told us to do, because we're no longer sitting in an office with them so they can watch us doing our work.
Yeah, so just going to say there's loads of, I've seen loads of discussion around the privacy aspects of the Microsoft platform that Brian's brought up. But yeah, turning to you as our a privacy expert, just wondering what your thoughts are on that, but then also the broader issues around the agile workforce.
I think 2 points here. The first one is in terms of trending towards an agile workforce. I think much in the same way that people got it wrong when they went through big outsourcing exercises back in the day. They would divest themselves of the people who worked at the boundaries, who understood what the demarcation looked like, what the specialism was that you just outsourced, as well as what that meant really intimately to your business, on often hiring them back at 5, 6, 7, 8 times the rate because they'd paid them off and then realized they needed them back again. I think you're going to have the same scenario going on with bringing in pockets of expertise. You're going to need that integration, those integration people. You're going to need those people at the edge who understand how they're fitting that Lego together, the master builder, as so to speak, with their spaggle for the people they need to keep. Spackles, sorry. Yeah, no, it was right. Anyway, never mind. I'm going to get totally trolled by someone about Lego now. But anyway, the other point about this, the privacy point about this, is I think we'd somehow lost the discussion about how open plan working wasn't working because everyone was so distracted they couldn't be productive. Yeah. And that we're now trying to shoehorn remote working into an open plan working productivity mindset, that trying to keep an eye over people's shoulder as one of the arguments for why we liked open plan working nonsensically. So one of the things, I got very involved in conversations about proctoring software for exams. It's close to my heart because I saw a lot of stuff gets tested out in schools and kids and then gets extended into the workforce once we've all become a little bit numb to it. See that and Microsoft Productivity for details. If there's, you have to look at the outcomes you're trying to achieve. And people do not produce well when they are being surveilled closely. It's the observer paradox. You're going to get real distinct problems. So we need to get some decent minds on how we change this paradigm for how we embody trust in a remote working relationship, because we all know that 90% of the time, the same problems that dogged us with not being able to get our job done, having the backing, the responsibility, the accountability delegated to us, are the same things that stop us remotely. It isn't just the fact we're at arm's length, it's a trust issue. And how do we embody that in a remote working world? So those are my two main takeaways. We need to rethink this because we never solved it the first time. We shouldn't just make it look the same just because it's the easiest way to go.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also reflecting that I'm quite lucky, and Tom's obviously quite lucky. He's sitting in a very similar location to me. Like he's got a tinkering den, maker space at home, and I live in a nice house where I've got space where I can actually go and work. But a lot of younger people starting out in the industry, they're working in their bedroom, and that's not a particularly nice place to work. But also, I think that the opportunities there, around a lot of this stuff, going back to Tom's point in terms of friction, just thinking about how do we solve this in a way that is it protects everybody, and that's really what cybersecurity is down to, but uses the way that we protect to drive down friction, to enable things. And that's one of the things that I'm really passionate about. So Tom, just thinking about that question, and the way that you this idea of a massive network of freelance agile freelance workers, from a kind of a technologist point of view, and the systems that people are going to want to sell and put in, the friction, it's just going to be immense. And it's particularly, where's that data going, and how do we protect that? What are your thoughts?
So I think the direction of travel is pretty obvious, right? So we've had a 50% increase in the number of self-employed people in the last 20 years in the UK, about 13% across Europe, and it's about similar to the UK, I think, in the US. So direction of travel is clear, and you've really got two classes of self-employed worker building up. You've got what you might call your gig economy worker, who has very low autonomy, is doing very tightly directed work with very little trust placed in them. They're given a specific set of instructions, what to do, where to go, where to put things, and relatively low pay as a result. And then you've got your much more trusted worker, who is effectively a single worker inside a corporate shell. And you've got the same sort of levels of agreement between company and that corporate shell as you might have had in a traditional outsourcing agreement. It's just we're using technology to take a lot of the friction out of setting those agreements. And those people can integrate very, very naturally into the corporate organization. They can be brought into the same Teams chat and everything else. But they're being trusted on the grounds of A, expertise, and B, contractual. You will not share this IP, you will behave this way, you will sign this NDA, etc. And I think what we're going to see is systems that take even more friction out of both processes. So right now, if you look at what Amazon's been doing in India in terms of helping Indian people set up their own businesses as Amazon delivery agents, like literally almost like a business in a box, making it very, very simple and low friction to pick that up, but with tightly bound controls on what they do and what they don't and how they operate, versus how we're operating here. And actually, so much of the friction has gone out of being a freelancer in the last 20 years. 15 years ago when I set up, it took 6 weeks to get a bank account. There was no SaaS accounting software that did all the work for me. There was no Google Drive. There was none of this stuff that makes my interaction with 7 or 8 different clients at a time really, really slick now that wasn't then. And I think the systems are going to go in the same direction, but I think the challenges are going to go in the same direction. And to your specific point, what we have to do is upskill everyone so that we can trust them, that they can take that autonomy with confidence, that they can handle data with confidence. And that's just in and of itself a really good thing. We're building capability in people who will then be more productive for themselves and more productive when they're supporting our businesses as well.
Yeah, I mean, that friction is a really interesting thing. So just like anecdote, my oldest son, a couple of years ago now, decided to set up a car washing business. His idol's Alan Sugar, gonna probably have about 5 businesses by the time he's my age. But he's like, oh, nobody does cash anymore. So he went onto Amazon, bought a card reader, set up an account, and he goes around, takes car payments for his car washing business. So if somebody that age can do that and integrate in such quite a complicated payment process with minimal risk, because it's all handled in the back end, they take a fee. There are, I think, things that we can get right, and combines these systems together. And I come back to the conversation about trust. And one of the things that's always spoken about in the finance industry is trust and confidence. And I think that they're often conflated, but they are two separate things. So thinking about actually how do we drive trust? How do we drive confidence in the system that it works? How do we then, reduce that friction? And for me, really fundamentally, this, like you say, getting everybody cybersecurity aware as the starting point, but then getting them to think about how they can actually use that to deliver on the trust, the confidence, and the low friction. I think that's the really important step, and I think that's the step that we need to kind of make next. So that kind of leads us on to the next question. So how do we get companies to stop seeing cybersecurity as a necessary evil and a drag on the bottom line? And that, for me, as I said at the top, that's the fundamental part of our security digitalization program, to say, actually, cybersecurity is a powerful good. It's not just, it shouldn't be a drag on the bottom line. And I talk about cyber-enabled and cyber-dependent, borrowing from cybercrime. So we talk about cyber-enabled innovation, where we take cybersecurity, and the example I use is data. So one of the responses to GDPR is reduce down the data. But if you reduce down the data, then you can do less with it, right? Because you haven't got so much. And small data is not as good as big data, apparently. So I'm told by data scientists. So you've got this reduction in data. But if you can hold that data more securely, coming back to the points that you've all made, then you've got the data, and you're reducing risk, and you're building confidence, and you're building trust. And so you're building a stronger business, and you're enabling yourself by doing cybersecurity better. And then when I talk about cyber dependent, I'm talking about these ideas of using the core technologies, so cryptography, the new ways that we identify ourselves, biometrics and so on, and then building new products, new services, new ways of thinking that sit around those. But at the heart, you couldn't do them. I mean, I mentioned video calls. We could have done this kind of 20 years ago. We had the technology. When I was doing computer science, we had the technology to do it, but it wasn't secure. Anybody could just jump in to like hack into a stream and do whatever they wanted to. All right. So now we've big thing about security. So the question is, how do we do this? And for me, it's about how do we change the perception that cybersecurity is a necessary evil and a drag on the bottom line. For me, it's about changing that question of, what can we do with cybersecurity once we've got it right? But I'd really be interested in your thoughts, everybody. Who wants to go first? Brian's on. Oh, Brian was unmuted.
No, go on, Sarah. You can go next.
Sarah, after you.
Oh, I'm going to be boring. Then you can shine, Brian. What is it? I think it's actually very boring stuff that you need to do first to enable what you're talking about. Daniel, basically, my whole focus has been on how can we take the pain out of understanding what data we've got and what kind of legal restrictions might be linked to it, in such a way that you can aggregate and analyze it and keep track of it over time. The problems with that is we haven't got the technology yet that can go out, crawl our networks and find all that stuff easily. What you need to do is go out and engage with all the stakeholders in your business and embed a way for them to tell you about new stuff when they're doing it. You need to get an invitation to the bright ideas factories. You need to make it easy to check back in when things change. You need to make yourself a pleasure to deal with as a security and privacy function. And that lays groundworks with both language and for the inherent risk indicators, the things that drive you to want to put some security in, that drive you to want to put a privacy control in. Where is the most data, where is the most sensitive data, where's the most throughput, where are the highest availability requirements. Lay people can answer those questions for you, but you need to build the mechanisms and the interfaces for them to provide you with that information. That serves the purposes, as I said, it uplifts awareness, it introduces you to them and what you care about and why you care of it, and it creates the mechanisms for them to give you the data to be able to even start to do your job. If you come to them with a fully formed, great, we're going to improve security, these are the things we've decided to do, you have to backfill all that meaning and hooks into their day jobs. if you get them to bring you the landscape that you're trying to secure, because you don't have it, let's be fair, whose CMDB looks complete, who's got a list of all their tin, who's got a list of all their data right now, then that journey of discovery and understanding what's important to you builds the foundations for your next steps.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's a couple of points you picked up there that I often, when I talk to companies, I often talk about. It's like who's responsible, right, for this? And
Love myself a racy.
Yeah, they shove it into a function, like the security function, wherever it is. But ultimately, everybody's responsible. The business unit owner is responsible for the risk of that business unit, right? And or that part of the network in a new agile networked organization. They're responsible for the risks, and I certainly see that cybersecurity specialists are responsible for helping to inform those people so they can balance the cybersecurity risks alongside the other business risks, because every business is digital, and they, you can't just go, oh well, we won't do it with technology anymore, right? So being a professional, being in a professional position, you have to balance the risks of everything else you do alongside those risks of doing the business. So, but Brian, you were going to say something.
I was, yes.
And witty.
Let me quickly paraphrase the question again. How do we get companies to stop seeing cybersecurity as a drag? Well, both of you, thank you, have played very delightfully into my hands, because you both went straight to, it's all right. No, it's good. Your answers were right, but mine is hopefully too. You've gone for the data and the technology straight away and missed out the humans. And so my answer to that question, and yours are all right as well, but my answer is disruption, because the people that are making decisions about budgets and bottom lines are the same people who've been making those decisions ad nauseam for the last 10, 20 years. And what you need is some new faces in that boardroom, on that decision-making panel, to be able to understand when more new technologies are presented to boards or new regulations come along. Actually, you need a different set of people in the decision-making process who can translate them differently and come up with different solutions. And so really, really quick and easy one for me, that one. How do we get companies to stop seeing cybersecurity as a drag? Well, you need to diversify and disrupt your boardrooms.
Tom, what are your thoughts?
I just come back to skills again. For me, we have underinvested in training and development of our people for quite some time now. And yeah, every time I hear a chief exec complaining about the cost of or the unavailability of people with digital skills, I say, well, how many are you training at the moment? And they say, none. It's like, well, where do you think this magic pool comes from? Because the universities literally cannot turn out enough people with the skills.
Yeah, the magic talent tree. Yeah,
right. And I think the same is true of cyber. This is an opportunity to develop your people, to build through the lens of cybersecurity, increased trust, increased engagement with you, increased autonomy, increased capability to take responsibility, to cut down on the risk factor in your business, to build the quality of your people and hence the trust and relationship you have with your customers. See it through that lens. This is a human capital development challenge, and a great lens through which to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I see so often, the standard security training packages, like you've got to do it for your compliance certificate. And actually, there's a real opportunity, because by and large, you look at the statistics, and if people basically applied, and there's some interesting research about why people don't apply their their standard cybersecurity practices that might have a home in the business, because but I won't get into that. But if people basically did the standard things that they would do at home, which you'd hope they do at home, like changing your password, setting the different PIN number, using the biometrics, all that type of stuff. And they apply and making sure they patch your machines and all these types of things. If they did that in the workplace, or didn't at least grumble about the fact that they now have to spend half an hour because they have to update their machine because they've got to switch it on, or whatever it's going to be. I take that half an hour and go make a cup of tea and then network with everybody else in the business, right? Find out some new contacts. But that's just me. The kind of research has shown that actually that would massively improve. I mean, it's the case for about the last 20 years that we've had the same top 5 vulnerabilities in organizations, and it's the classic Pareto principle. 20% of the effort will solve 80% of the problems, and that's one of the frustrating things. And it is about that messaging. So there's a real opportunity, I think, just in terms of the skilling. But yeah, working in HE and being the course director for our MSc in cybersecurity, yeah, we can't turn out good quality people fast enough. You know, pretty much in the first term, all of the students are, you know, coming to me and saying, I've got this job interview, I've got this, that, and the other. So you know, they can't even get to our first careers fair before they're being offered jobs, right? And you know, our first career fair is in November. So, you know, it's like 4 weeks into the course, so they're kind of already being headhunted, and it's crazy. It's just crazy. But yeah, the skills, but also I think there's something. Cybersecurity isn't another anymore. It's not an other thing that you know, outside somebody else's responsibility. And I think it is that responsibility thing, right? You know, and I think so in some ways technology has caught us by sort of unaware. You know, the PCs we have at work, particularly, you know, my generation and a bit older, they came along and we could still do our work without the equipment. But now they're so essential that we can't do that. But you know, for this generation, my children's generation, you know, 11 and 14, everything they, you know, I think they would actually just go into some sort of coma if I said, that's it, I'm turning the internet off, right? The only time, actually, it's funny, like the other weekend, you know, there was something wrong with the Wi-Fi. That was the only time I saw my son come down. It was like, the Wi-Fi is not working. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm trying to fix it. But anyway, yeah, so that's my slight rant. But yeah, I think skills development is super important. And you know, you look at the initiatives for the NCSE around skills, but specifically not just I know how to make sure this computer is secure, but also I know how to use cybersecurity within my business. And I think that's knowledge and skills. You know, I think why is it so important for business? I think that's really important to understand. Sarah, you've unmuted.
Yeah, yes, you noticed. I had a concept from an awareness point of view. I mean, it's only one suggestion of things to do, but it takes on board your points of G&T, which was if I could have afforded it, it would have been Bombay Sapphire, but it wasn't. It was give and take. It was asking people to bring a home or personal security challenge. You know, it could be something as trivial as, I don't know what to check when I think the internet's down, which is the thing that I've told my children not to tell me has happened, because I worked in networking and the internet is not down, darling. It's the router. But anyway, so they bring something from home, or it could be something as serious as, maybe I've got a problem with one of my exes who's making threats about getting someone to hack me, and train your people to draw parallels with keeping the business safe. Tell them how you scale that stuff up from a business point of view. And then you can actually identify people who are passionate about this stuff, people who have that enhanced level of interest, or that enhanced analytical bent, or are really just fascinated. They ask the next question and the next question, and then you start to build a pool of evangelists and people who you might want to train, who could be your new recruits. Because I don't know why we're not training from within our ranks in businesses. You know, yes, of course, you risk losing people if you upskill them to that extent in a hot trade, but if you treat people right, you get an incredible amount of loyalty as well. And
also, if those people are, you know, the ethos of those people are aligned with the ethos of the business, I think that's also really important.
Risk,
and you do see a growing concern within. I think within my students, actually, I did a survey of them, and they started this term, and they said, actually, you know, one of their primary things about picking a business now is, does the ethos of the business align with what I think? But coming back to your point, one of the, you know, I've worked with a couple of companies, and I've said, they've talked to me about the training aspect, and I said, well, how do we do a mass training program for our organization? I said, don't do the training program for your organization, do the training program to protect themselves at home. Like, and don't even talk about how this impacts the business, because as soon as they start asking the questions, they'll start asking the questions in the business. Is this right? Brian, you wanted to say something, I think.
Very quickly, I just wanted to endorse both the points you just made. Over the years, I've done an awful lot of work in secondary schools and other educational institutions around security awareness. And one of the best things to do, I found, was to take a load of freebies. And my best freebie is a webcam cover. And I used to work on the Barefoot Computing project as well. So we were teaching primary school teachers how to teach the curriculum. So you would give one away to somebody to take home, and they would like what's this? And when you explain what a webcam cover is, what it does and why it does it and what it's for, very basic little bit of home security there. They're like, oh, can I have one for my nan? She's always on the webcam. Can I have one for my auntie? She's rubbish at computers. And suddenly these young people are taking that tiny, tiny piece of plastic home and having a conversation about real security issues with their family members and the people they care about. And it's exactly as you say, Dan, that then has a circular effect, because when you understand, and to Sarah's point, it's all about context. If you can contextualize issues of cybersecurity into people's real daily lives at home, protecting their loved ones, protecting themselves, that will automatically, by osmosis, work its way back into their working practices. So yes, I fully endorse all the things you've just said, which is rare for me.
Brilliant. Oh yeah. Well, thanks everybody so far. I'm just going to give over the final word to Tom in terms of the things we've been discussing, and I want to, what do you think the key takeaways are that anybody listening, watching this, the one thing from an applied futurist thinking about the future, what's the kind of one thing that they should perhaps think about, putting you on the spot, this business, cybersecurity, and the future?
So, I talked about this shift from an optimization culture to an agile culture to an adaptability culture. And people often think that means doing things quickly and cheaply and often badly. And actually the reverse is true. You've got to learn to do things well, rather than, because you're not going to be doing them over and over and over again. You've got to be you've got to do stuff well the first time around. And that for me is one of the big sort of alignments with cybersecurity. It's about doing stuff well, doing stuff properly, and not leaving those gaps, those holes, those flaws and cracks that let your customers down, let your business down, and create risk. And so for me, there's a huge alignment between this age of agility and dealing with high frequency change, and actually some of the core meshes of cybersecurity, which is just about doing stuff properly, quite often in a way that builds that trust, which, as Sarah pointed to, is so critical.
Yeah, my mum used to say to me, more speed, less haste, I think is the key thing. So thanks to everyone. It's been a really interesting conversation. So I'd like to thank my guests, Brian, Sarah, and especially Tom for his insightful and engaging talk. I'd also like to thank some of the teams behind the scenes. So John Lomas at Lancaster University for producing this event and fielding your questions through to us. Bruce Thomas at Tribes for creative support and bringing together a great team in John Serdovan at Serdovan Creative, Nicolette Webster at Flex Media. I hope you can join us for our next Beyond Cybersecurity. Just to mention, this show was funded by Research England. So thanks everybody, and see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.